Welcome to Smart Franchising with Fransmart. I'm Dan Rowe, and I've masterminded the ascent of local favorites to global dominators. This isn't your usual get-to-know-you chat. We're diving deep. We're revealing the raw truths about franchise wealth building. With over 30 years in the trenches, I'm spilling it all. If you have an appetite for unfiltered tales and the hidden blueprints of franchise prosperity, buckle up. We're diving in. All right, welcome back to Smart Franchising with Fransmart. And today, my guest is Jay Sonner from North Point, the firm that does most of the big M&A in the restaurant and the franchising business. You know, the whole point of starting a business is to become wealthy. And the final crescendo is selling your company for a life-changing amount of money, hopefully generationally life-changing amounts of money. And you need to build a company that someday somebody's going to want to pay a fortune for. And the guy to know is Jay Sonner from North Point. Jay's going to dish about the secrets to getting massive exit, higher than usual multiples. So let's get started. Jay, tell us about yourself and North Point.
Happy to do it. I love that intro. I knew I was going to have fun on this conversation. So thanks for the nice way of saying that. My name's Jay Sonner. I'm a partner and managing director at North Point. North Point's been around or founded 20 years ago. We're a firm that focuses exclusively on the consumer space. We do more consumer M&A, more multi-unit M&A, more franchise M&A than any other firm out there. And generally, that's like a $100 million deal to a $3 billion deal, just to give some sense of scope and scale. Average deal size we do is probably 500, 600 million at this point. So, the last thing I'd say just generally on the firm, and then you can, double click on any of that, is we're independent. So we're not connected to a larger institution that does sales and trading or equity research or anything like that, which allows us to be very relationship focused, not transaction focused. So a lot of the folks we work with, we developed dialogues, relationships, advisory rapport, far before they ever transact. We try to give people high integrity, direct input. That's, sometimes inconvenient to doing a transaction that in the near term, but we feel like is the right perspective on their business, over the long term.
Well, and I'm glad I know you. So I'm glad I know you, and I'm glad that you're really kind with a lot of our brands, giving them some free mentorship along the way. But talk about some of the, like we talked a little bit about companies that just build high value, high enterprise value, high multiples. Like, what's the difference? Well, first of all, tell us about some of the brands that have traded at high multiples or sold for high multiples or raised money at a high multiple.
Sure. Look, I mean, it depends on what year, what subsector. The other thing I should have said is we do generally sort of 15 to 20 deals a year. But I would say, the market's at an interesting stage right now. We're kind of coming out of the pandemic into 21. There's a little bit of a roller coaster where things were trading at exceptionally high multiples in a period where there was very, very low cost of capital. Then there was a bit of a pause in the market starting the second half of 22 into 23. And now the market feels like it's picking up again. So, look, the areas you tell me if you want to redirect or, where you want to spend time in terms of subsegments. An area that I've spent a lot of time in lately, we call wellness and beauty services. There are a lot of franchise businesses in that category. An interesting one to talk about a little bit might be Hand and Stone, which is a deal that we did in the first half of 2022. We did another deal called Radiance in the second half of 2022. Those are both franchise deals. I'm trying to focus exclusively on franchise deals. So we could go into anywhere you want to go. Those might be two to double click on.
Why don't you talk about restaurants first? Just some restaurant deals you did back when you were doing restaurant deals. Sure. Because the audience, food and non-food. And then I'd love to go right into the ones that you just mentioned, Hand and Stone. But, So how about some restaurant deals that you've seen? Like I remember at one point seeing a deck from you on, what was it called? It was a breakfast concept, but it was,
Snooze.
Yeah. Snooze. And I mean, really high multiples. So it's like, what are some examples of some concepts that just fetched really high multiples? And what is it about those concepts that allows them to get those kind of multiples?
Yeah. I mean, look, when we think about businesses that are going to fetch like a great reaction for the market, there's kind of an operational definition, right? So it starts with brand. It goes to unit model. It moves on to like, how much has that unit model been proven? So is it portable across a bunch of different geographies? And then within those geographies, is it portable within like urbanicity, right? So downtown segments versus suburban segments versus ex-urban segments. And how much is it proven that model works in a lot of different places? After that, it moves on to like, what are those concepts pipelines look like? In other words, what's the embedded growth? If you're 100 units, but yet you're building 50 in that year, or you've sold 200 more franchises, generally you can see the writing on the wall as to where that concept's going to grow. So that's worth more. Momentum, things like same store sales. If the consumer is using this more today than they were yesterday, and you're growing more in the future, then there's going to be a lot of momentum in sales, which translates into profitability. Um, Team, it's not to be overlooked. You could almost start there. Everything is people, right? Who's running it? How much perspective they have on the category they're in? How passionate are they about it? How original is their thinking? If it's inside restaurants, then have they got something truly unique, which ties back to the brand point, right? People and brand are closely connected. Um, you know, and maybe I'd throw in just for extra credit points. There's something to be said for aspirational brands. Does the brand reflect who you are, who you want to be in the world you want to live in? Is often how I talk about it.
Hmm.
So, is there a purpose behind patronizing the brand? That can work in different ways, and we could use different examples to illustrate that if it's helpful. We've talked before about snooze, as you mentioned. That concept had a lot of purpose built into it, and all these other aspects that we just talked about: kick-ass unit economic model, portability across states, a subsegment of restaurants that's done very well, breakfast. So all those things together in aggregate is what the investing world looks at. And then scale, like, is it 2 in EBITDA or is it 15 in EBITDA? At some point, there's a little bit of a sweet spot in scale where more sponsors can afford a deal or can write the requisite equity check into that deal, which means there's more competition to make the investment. And when there's more competition, that's the world we live in. That's where you can go and drive value and get a great outcome.
Hmm. What about unit economics? Like, just for the audience, what is an example of an above average unit economic any brand should be trying to get to? I always think about it. People, sometimes like, what's your COGS? What's your labor? At the end of the day, I look at what's your ROI and how easy is it to scale those businesses, but how fast do I get the capital back? And am I making so much money that I actually want to open up more? But like, what do you look at in terms of unit economics?
I love this. I love talking to you generally because I love this sort of stuff, and I love where your perspective comes into it. That's how we think about it too. So there's a lot here, right? It's how much are you putting into the box versus how much are you getting out, right? That can flow in the restaurant category. We talk about prime cost, COGS, and labor, right? And where do those land? But ultimately, like, that formula can work in a ton of different ways. It can work much differently in a Wingstop or a nothing bun cake than it might work in a snooze or a First Watch, right? So keeping life very simple, radical compression with minimal distortion, right? It's how many dollars are you putting into that box versus how much are you getting out in profitability. And then the dimension that I think people overlook and the street overlooks a lot when you see public reporting is like, people refer to the ratio that I just referred to as cash on cash returns. But the question is kind of what you said, which is another reason. It just reminded me that I love your perspective on this stuff, which is, okay, fine. Like, at year 3, maybe you're a mature store, your sales have ramped, and maybe your ratios look good there. But I kind of want to know, like, what it looks like in year 1, year 2, and year 3, right? How quickly it ramps to where it's going to be. What's your payback time? Because there's plenty of concepts out there that have decent year 5 ratios, right? Like, if you take that year 5 sales, you multiply it by the 4-wall margin, you get to a decent cash flow number. And if you look at the original investment versus that, maybe it chins the bar, but it might take a long time to get there. So that's another aspect of this that you want to look at carefully. From an investing perspective, people think about, what kind of money am I putting into this business, and then what's its free cash flow look like? And the closer that window is to investment to getting your money back, the more free cash flow the overall business creates. And from your franchisee's perspective, that's great, because if they get paid back their money fast, then they can go open another franchise.
Yeah, you mentioned nothing but cakes. I know you were involved with that. I saw it when it only had a couple locations, and I didn't get it. I didn't. I looked at that and I said, I don't know if that's really going to be a thing. And obviously, I was wrong. One of my neighbors here in Arizona has a bunch of them, and he would buy hundreds of them if he could. Like, he just talks about the ROI and how simple they are to operate and how unique they are. Right? It's a different thing. Like, everyone else is running a cookies or cupcakes. It's like they kind of own a subcategory all by themselves. But talk about packaging that thing up and selling that off. Who bought it, by the way?
Sure. So we sold it to Rourke. And I should mention, so our firm I joined North Point when we were 5 people. I think I was the 6th person there. So our firm is now around 60 people. We work very uniquely because we're an independent bank. The core folks I joined the firm with all work super closely together. That was led by a couple of my colleagues, Cooper McKee and Matt Kelly. We're all very close to it. We all sort of, review the materials before they go out, things like that. But I would tell you, they created a unique space in the consumer's perceptual map, the way you just referred to. It's kind of the cool thing about food and restaurants. It's sometimes harder to do in like fitness or other categories where everyone's buying the same machinery, right? All you really have is a sign over the door and how well you operate. Inside restaurants, you can get like proprietary recipes that you can't go replicate somewhere else. And then how do you build a brand around that and awareness around that? Bun cakes are something special. They have a fantastic model. They got to profitability incredibly quickly. They're 99% franchised, so people love that. That high recurring cash flow. They were at scale, and the feedback we got from the market was that it was unique enough that no one was going to come and take their lunch. And that's what you think about. Like, what are your competitive moats like? When people are investing behind a deal, you want to know that you're relatively protected from someone coming and knocking you off and opening right next door to you.
So, like a group like Rourke, so people build companies, a founder builds a company to a certain stage, a buyer like Rourke likes a brand. Like what does a Rourke look for in a brand? How does somebody shape their company someday so Rourke wants to buy it?
Yeah. Um, that's a great reminder of the filter through which we should be thinking about this. So I would say, and I'll set this aside, most of these big private equity groups invest thematically, right? Like they'll have big picture perspectives on areas that are benefiting from secular growth in the economy. And then they'll say, okay, now how do I go find a model in this category? Um, and then you're in the place where, that is more interesting for you and I to talk about, I think, for your audience, which is like, what then are the aspects of that model inside the category they've already decided that make it interesting. And that goes back kind of to what I was saying. You got to run it through that operational definition. It's team, it's brand, it's unit economic model. It's I didn't say when I said this before, but it's white space. Obviously, that's very important. Total addressable market. So if you've done all those things right, like I said, if you've got the right unit economic model, if you've got the momentum you need, if you got the pipeline you need, that's not great if you're 100 units, but there can only be 150 in the country. No one's buying that for that sort of growth. It is great if you're 100 units and you can be 2,000 in the country, because then you're in a place where you're going to create a lot of present value, right? And you're going to pay for that growth, and you're going to pay in terms of multiple. So, that's kind of 101. You want something that is awesome and can be a lot bigger. And really, that's kind of what these guys are looking to do, right? They're looking for opportunities too, Dan. Sometimes, meaning like it's okay if private equity loves buying A+ assets where everything's working right, and kind of the momentum play. They're also good with here's a founder driven business that has a lot of stuff going for it, has the right brand genetics, but may not have the sophistication from a systems perspective. And we, private equity, tell themselves, we have a playbook. We know how to hook them up with the right distribution, the right POS systems, the right, marketing, customer acquisition infrastructure, so that we can go create value in this thing. So that's another, or it can be also it can also be, let's say it's a franchisor, let's say it's 99% franchised. It can also be, hey, we think there's an arbitrage opportunity to go buy back 10% of our system and turn them into company owned units. And that'll create a lot of earnings accretion, right? So there's little triggers like that they can do too. But ultimately, PE looks for growth opportunities for great brands with awesome economics, and a proven unit model.
Yeah, and I know I've introduced you to a couple of our new non-food brands. We actually got in the non-food space. We have electronics business that we've introduced you to. We have a
Yeah,
skincare business that we've introduced you to.
sure.
And the skincare, they're both growing faster than anything I've ever worked on. The skincare business is ridiculous also because it's got this membership model, which is almost like cheating, right? And I don't know why I didn't realize this sooner, but like an Orange Theory or a fitness place or our place. They wind up selling 20, 30, 50% of the CapEx they get that back in membership pre-sales. So it's the funniest thing. Like I kind of wish, like I wonder what as good as Five Guys was for us. I wonder if we also layered a membership model on
Burger
top of
membership.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
burger
Well,
membership.
I love this topic, right? I love this category. This is a category we've spent. I have a colleague, Raya Raphael, and she and I do a lot in this. We call it wellness and beauty services. Sort of 5, 6 years ago, North Point's genetics are in the restaurant category. There is a lot done in this category. It's $1 trillion space. It's growing faster than GDP growth, growing faster than baseline, macro growth, and it's very innovative. And so there's a lot to do there all the time. The learnings from that category also apply to other subsegments in physical space, which have become more interesting. We love this category of wellness and beauty services that the brand you mentioned. I'm not sure if you want to say it or not, but we could talk more
Glow
about that.
30.
Yeah. So we love this category that Glow is playing in. Glow has a lot of the aspects that we just went through, that thing that I'm calling the operational definition. Skincare services, depending on how you define it, $5, $6, $7 billion category in the US currently, growing at something like 13, 14%, depending on which top 3 consulting firm you're asking and what day of the week it is. So just a ton to do there. People perceive that category less as pampering and more as hygiene these days. And so the thing that makes it tremendously exciting is the consumer adoption, like the lines of cross between the efficacy that's there and the consumer's willingness to go adopt those lines. And the way that winners are playing in that space, and I Glow's a great example of this, comes back a little bit to what I was saying before about restaurants, which is restaurants are uniquely endowed with the opportunity to create proprietary recipes and do things on their own. I would say that's hard to go do in subcategories like fitness, and Glow 30 plays between skincare services and a little bit of med spa, right? And those folks often are buying the same machines, the same creams. They're not that differentiated. Glow's doing something that makes it tremendously exciting, which is she's got a real proprietary approach to how she's treating you. She's layered in things like AI for skin scanning. And if I'm a franchisee and I'm trying to get into this space, there's a ton of players, a couple good ones, a couple other good ones too, but there's a lot of also rans, and she's got something that exists back to that idea in a unique space on the consumer's perceptual map. So if I'm a franchisee, that's it. First of all, the numbers rock. I out of this world rock. So if you're a franchisee and you're running it through, okay, I've got all these options. I want to get into a category that has long-term growth trends. Done. I want to get into a business model, thinking like with my private equity hat on. I'm category first, then business model. Numbers rock. So you're going to get in there. And then you think about what's the defensibility of this over time, kind of back to the nothing bun cakes conversation. What are you doing that like someone's not going to come and open their door right next to you and take away your customer? She's got enough proprietary stuff going on there that it's a nice competitive mode. And they're good people. Like back to this idea that, you kind of, it's all comes down to people, especially in consumer brands. They're just cool people. So
Yeah,
I ended up being an advertisement for Glow 30. I know that's
no. I appreciate it. I agree with you. We got lucky. We got lucky with this brand because I didn't really know the difference between them versus everybody else. And I remember at one point she says, I want to be the Orange Theory of skincare. I'm like, great. I found someone online from Orange Theory. I said, I'm going to Venmo you money. Go check this place out and tell me what's unique and different and special about it.
Yeah.
She did, and it was glowing result. And now that same person from Orange Theory works for Fransmart doing the franchise development for Glow. So, but it's funny because at Glow, we have like, not only I'm a restaurant guy excited about Glow, not only me, we've got a bunch of food franchisees that are now in Glow. We've got educational franchisees that are now in Glow. We basically got haircut franchisees that are in in Glow now. And it really is them looking, the whole point of getting into franchises to try and build a big business, right? To get more out of life. And so it's really, what brand am I growing? And a lot of these folks are choosing Glow Glow 30 as a better brand. So what advice do you have for emerging early stage franchisors so that they have a Massage Envy or a Massage, or a Jimmy John's sort of exit? Like, what should they be doing? What kind of advice do you give to coach them, to shape them so that they have an exit?
Yeah. I mean, I guess a bigger one would be invest to build the business that you're going to have, not the business you have today. So especially when especially when you're franchising, I think there's an attraction to, you and I have talked about this. There's an attraction to selling a lot of franchises, right? And that's great because you get your franchise fee. But it's very important to build something sustainable, right? So you want to make sure that you're investing in your franchisees. What do I mean by that? You're not actually handing them money, but that you've got the right training infrastructure, the right support infrastructure. That they're able to continue. They're endowed and empowered with process, right? Because then they're going to be consistently operating your brand in various geographies and making impressions with consumers, which ultimately they become the stewards of your brand, right? So for early stage operators, there's nothing more important than that, those thousands of first impressions that you're making. Because if you hand off your brand to an operator that's not fantastic, maybe that doesn't have the experience, or isn't passionate about it, there's different ways to go about that, then they can really harm your brand equity. And that's not what you want. So it kind of starts there. So putting a bow on that, investing for the business you're going to have, not the one you have today. It's hiring the right people, investing in the right systems and processes to support franchise success.
Yeah, we make a financial model for each of our brands and we show them what would it be like if you had 100 one-unit franchisees, for example, and the revenue you get and then the support that you have with 100 individual franchisees compared to the same 100 units owned by only 10 franchisees. And it's infinite. It's so much more profitable if a franchisor has multi-unit franchisees. And I'm constantly baffled how much I have to argue with franchisors about investing in whatever it takes to get your franchisees to want to build more stores, right? So, at the end of the day, your unit economics, not only unit economics, but don't frustrate the franchisees. Like make them want, they're going to build something, make them want to build your concept.
It's like a bunch of light bulbs just went off my mind when you said that. So that is an interesting corollary to something that we often market when we're marketing businesses, which is the percentage of new units that are coming from existing franchisees. Because when they're voting with their wallet, that's a very strong affirmation of your system going well, your franchisees being happy, the unit economics working, and the opportunity for future growth, right? So that very metric, the number, I probably shouldn't say it, but the number on Hand and Stone, for example, was a very high number. They had a very high ratio of existing franchisees that were building new stores. We always look at that. You don't want a system where you've sold a lot of franchises, everyone's opened one, and they're not opening their next one, because that tells you, like, if you're making a lot of money, if you're making your economics work the way we were just talking about, you're going to reinvest that capital back into opening more stores because you want to see that happen again. If it's not happening, it's a flashing yellow light at the very least.
Yeah, I love Hand and Stone. I like John Tezza. He's a buddy of mine. And so with Hand and Stone, like that's what are some things that they did right with their franchisees to make their franchisees want to keep opening up more stores?
I mean, that thing is a machine. That business is a machine. They have just about the best systems and infrastructure out there. Credit to their prior investor, which was Levine Leichman. Credit to their current investor, which is Harvest. Those guys have really doubled down on building out their infrastructure and their C-suite in a super powerful way. So there's a nice imbrication to the point I was just making from the franchise perspective, which is build a business for what you're going to have, not what you have today. They're always forward investing in that business. The management team, they had every functional area of their management team. They had a number one and number two in place, meaning, it was just a deep team with a lot of sophisticated perspective. Look, they are in a category that's a great category. Wellness is a great category, so it starts there. Their model was interesting from the perspective that they were forward thinking, back to the Glow 30 idea, in that they lent into skincare early. So a big part of their sales came out of that modality. And they were kind of the harbinger in the country in terms of folks that had gone there. And so they were very innovative on that front, which gave them a different value proposition than other places that were strictly doing massage. And so it propelled their unit economics in a very powerful way. And they were beginning to adopt. They had membership on massage. They had membership, to Hand and Stone that you could use in either one. But recently they've been building a lot more momentum on the skincare side.
So say it again. You said invest in the company you're trying to sell.
That's a good way to say it. I would say invest in the business you want to have, not the business you have today.
Yeah.
Invest, build the business for the business you're going to have. If it
Yeah.
means you're going to sell it, sure. And like maybe to bring that down a little bit and make it less, quotey and more practical, it means that look at who's in your office. Like what people do you have around you? I happen to know that the Glow 30 founders have just hired in other folks from some highly successful other multi-unit platforms. Great, because they're going to bring all those learnings. Those folks know where the potholes in the road are, and then how to drive around them now. They've had that experience, and they're not going to make the same mistakes when they're at Glow. They're going to bring that wisdom to bear. And so you want those folks. If there's an opportunity, if you're clunky because you got one store using this POS system or this set of stores using this POS system, or you don't have a POS, or you don't have a system for stuff, spend the money, build those systems, because as you scale, it's hard to hold the doors on that Ferrari as it's driving 150 miles an hour. You want stuff bolted down, right? And it's going to make it. I mean, you know a lot about this, Dan. So I feel like I could interview you on this. But it's important that as you're opening more and more and more units, that those go seamlessly out of the gates, and you need systems for that.
Yeah, and we're always telling our franchisors and our franchisees to staff for the sales you want, right? Staff for the business that you want, which is not only like the number of people, but the quality of people, right? You have to. And if we sell like a 10 unit franchise, I'm not letting a guy buy a 10 unit franchise and then just staff for one location, because there's going to be turnover. That person's going to be constantly coming out of a hole, right? So, if somebody's buying a 10 unit franchise, they should staff for the first few locations, like a director of ops and a manager, whatever. It's worth it, because the whole point is to get a business that's going to self fund and to grow itself to something big, where the franchisee, it doesn't have to be an operator, right? Like you buy a franchise not to operate the business, but to own the business and to grow the business. So, but you said something interesting with Hand and Stone. You said that something about they had two people in every position. Was that for redundancy or people development, or what was that about? Because
Both.
that's definitely a big investment.
Yeah, and I don't know that they would have necessarily talked about it that way. It just what I mean by that is that they had a very impressive team, but the people behind that team were very impressive too. And that's the hallmark of a good organization. I think when you were just talking, I wrote down to make sure to say this. This can apply at the C-suite. This can apply at the corporate office, but it also applies just as in just an apropos way at the store level. And that is a key KPI that folks look at when they're diligencing a business is what retention looks like. You want high retention. You want low turnover, because exactly what you said a minute ago, which is you don't really want to have to retrain people all the time. The quality of your consumer experience goes down. You're tied up constantly in recruiting, and you're bringing people on. They're not fully trained. They've got to get trained on the job, and the flywheel just starts to suffer. So that's another great one. It could have put it in the operational definition. What's your culture look like, and what does that mean for retention? Because ultimately that's passed back on to the consumers. And I think it's especially relevant. It's probably even a more germane conversation now that we've gone there for franchisees, because franchisees don't own the brand, they don't do the marketing, and they don't really do the innovation, right? So what are they doing? How do you build a kick-ass franchise? You operate. And what's a big part of that? It's retaining skilled people, getting the right people on the bus in the right seats that are great, and then being good enough to them, or creating an environment where they thrive such that they don't turn over, because you want that, you want their experiences in place to drive that consumer prop. And I'm tempted to give you some examples of bad cases where that wasn't good, but that's probably not the most the most positive conversation to have. But there are wipeouts in that category.
Yeah, no, I would like to talk about some of the woes and what are some things that franchisees and franchisors have done that have backed themselves into a corner so that they never get bought out.
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of the inverse of what we're talking about, right? The most common mistake that I think we see is franchisors. This is start on the franchisor side. Franchisors have a unit economic model that's working. In specific cases, maybe those units are company owned, maybe they've started to sell franchises, but they go and just blow it out. They sell to franchisees who might not be well capitalized, might not be present in the markets they bought, meaning they're absentee owners. They might not be operators of other chains. It's nice to open a Glow 30 with someone who's done another concept, or a Pay More with someone who's done another concept, because they're dyed in the wool operators who know how to do this.
Yeah.
And so where we've seen these go wrong is you just sell franchises, sell them to anybody who's going to pick them up, and then we're back in that bad cycle where they're opening because they put money into it. They might not be good at recruiting. They might not have the right front lines. They're not great stewards of your brand, and they're creating first impressions, and those impressions are not going well. So you've handed your business stewardship, the impression stewardship, over to people who are not good stewards. That's a pretty negative thing. That's on the franchisor side. Look, I mean, if the unit economics work and you get good franchisees and you have a great kick-ass concept and an awesome secular category with awesome secular trends, that's probably going to work, and you support them well and you invest properly behind them, that's probably going to work. On the franchisee side, it goes back a little bit to what I was saying also, which is you don't get to choose trade dress, right? That's given to you by the franchisor. You're not doing innovation. You're not doing marketing, really. You're not driving like the national marketing strategy. So you got to be a good operator. Franchisees, you want to pick a concept that you feel like has enough proof points to it, or has numbers that are so outstanding that even if you're the fourth unit, you know what I mean, that even if you have those returns, then it's gonna go well. So you want to pick a good concept, obviously, and then Dan, franchisees trade, like, putting back squarely on my head or my investment banker perspective. Franchisee units, businesses, when they're small, 2, 3, 4, 5 units, maybe to 10 units, those things trade sort of like 3.5, 4 times, 5 times EBITDA. Once they begin to develop some scale and some geographic diversification and some systems, they might trade for 6, 7 times, 6 times. Once you develop real scale and kind of enterprise class and have strong executive leadership, those things are trading 7, 8 times, and the best among them 9 times, right? We've sold businesses for north of that are exceptional, that have everything going for them. And when they have everything going for them, they're for a tier 1 brand with exceptional operations that's doing very well. Wingstop comes to mind. They have geographic diversification. They have retention, like I was talking about. They have, when you look across their KPIs and you look at it versus the system generally, often they're top decile, right? Like, their ticket times are low. Their NPS from their consumers is high. Their consistency of, if it's restaurants, then the consistency of product is very high. One of the first deals I worked on when I first started North Point was with somebody that you interviewed on your podcast, which is Greg Flynn. I worked with him in 2010 or 2011, when it was called Apple American Group, and he did a deal to Goldman. And I was a lawyer, and I was fortunate enough to start working in investment banking. And I learned so much from working with him and his CFO, Lauren Cortina's his CFO. And those guys just had a perspective on how to go. The term risk-adjusted returns, I learned from him. Like, they had a perspective on how they were going to build that business. It's everything I'm talking about. It was like day part diversification, geographic diversification. It eventually became model diversification because he got more than one banner, right? It was an incentive structure that really keep people bought in and had him retain his folks. It was a little bit of, I think, what you're talking about a second ago, which is like staffing for the restaurant that you expect to have, for the sales level you expect to have, leaning into all that stuff. So, franchisees, they sell well when they're fantastic operators, when their business is diversified, when they're a great tier 1 brand, when their KPIs are top tier, top decile in their system. And there's an opportunity. Maybe they've proven that they can M&A a little bit. Maybe they can go and, maybe they bought some units and folded them in and improved performance. That's also a nice value lever that generally the market tends to like.
Yeah, you mentioned Greg Flynn. The biggest smile I got from him on my podcast is when we started to talk about non-food franchising, his membership model franchise. Big smile.
Yeah, I don't want to forget that. That was a good call out. I mean, Amen on all that. I like that's the thing that we love inside wellness and beauty services. You can a lot of times you can pre-sell before you open, so you're profitable very first day. The street private equity loves the recurring cash flows. It's a more predictable way to structure your business. Generally, it's a little bit outside food, but in this category, operates a little bit more like on a DTC metric, which is LTV, lifetime value. So if you can go acquire a customer for $10, but their lifetime value with you through your membership is $100 or $1,000 or whatever, that's another unit economic ratio that people look at carefully, and they're fantastic in this. If you can go, add someone to a Planet Fitness or to a Glow 30 or, to a Hand and Stone, and they're with you for 3 years and they're very inexpensive to acquire, but they give you all that money. It's a very powerful way to drive same store sales because you build a customer base and then you acquire more on top of that. And a friend of mine calls it building the pyramid. You just build your sales like that. So it drives long-term comps.
Yeah, not to mention they bring other customers to you, or if it's a franchisee, they bring other franchisees to you. So, we had like at Glow, we had one Great Clips franchisee. Before you know it, now there's two, and there's about to be two more. So, hey, let's shift a little bit. I want to get your thoughts on real estate and the role that real estate plays in the success of a brand. And
Yeah.
so I've seen it where, to me, the very best marketing any retail or restaurant can do is real estate. It's actually getting the right spot in the right market. And I'm shocked how many people will pay a little bit less money and go off center, or they just pick the wrong site. But in your opinion, any examples of where a brand really nailed real estate and that helped define the cool of the brand and the success of the brand?
Shake Shack, I always use it as the example. But this is a really fun conversation because I want to for the marketplace of ideas, I want to disagree on a point, and then I'll go
Okay.
back and say where I agree. I think in particular in restaurants, which are generally encountered by the consumer while they are exploring what we're now calling physical space, like, real life, driving around. Oh, there's my visibility, access, signage, parking, all that good stuff. Everyone's got their acronym for that. Um, if you are a tier one brand, uh, like Shake Shack, you need to be going into rad real estate. Your co-tenancy. There's a phrase like, you're an average of the five people you spend the most amount of time with. It's a little bit like that, right? Like you want to make sure that you're associating your co-tenancy with brands that have a similar brand halo to yours, or close enough. Um, it's not always the case in some of these other subsegments, Dan. They're med spa, for example, which Glow 30 touches up against. You are often acquiring your customers digitally for those. So they kind of have the benefit of being able to go into tier two, tier three markets or sites, because you're telling them on the website where to go. And it doesn't matter. They don't have to pay up. They don't have to pay that rent. Right. So I think the real estate calibrating a real estate model appropriately depends upon where you are getting your customers. If you're getting them from drive-by visibility, then you got to really factor in the filter that I was saying. What is that visibility? What does it do for your brand? What are the co-tenants? And a lot of these brands, let's face it, in a world where retail has been under pressure for a long time and landlords need that traffic, sometimes those like tier one A+ sites, they may want your tenant more. They might not be as expensive as you anticipate it being, and it may be the best to be in those places because you're helping bring traffic to them. That's how that would work. But if you're acquiring your customers digitally, for a lot of the stuff in wellness services, you don't necessarily have to find that same real estate. And sometimes I have a theory. This is like a little iconoclastic, but I think that sometimes if a brand is authentic enough, it may be better that it's not on a former Chili's pad. You know what I mean? Like it might be cooler if it's in a like Snooze, just because we're talking about that a little bit, did a fantastic job. It's going into like gentrifying areas and being a cool brand, right? And those areas usually eventually become cool, and they went into tier one sites too. But they didn't have to necessarily go to main on main. So I think you got to calibrate it by what your brand stands for
Yeah,
and the
and
mall.
that's a good point. One of the things I was thinking was, Joint Chiropractic. Like I had never heard of the brand before. And then all of a sudden, when I first heard about it, I saw it. It was normally to go to a chiropractor, you're going into medical offices or you're going into something like that. Joint was putting itself next to Starbucks or grocery stores or basically your daily needs. And I'm like, that's actually a really good idea. Like go to where they are. But I don't know. I guess I was thinking about that with restaurants is very, very, very important. I mean, if you don't have the right site and the right project, people are creatures of habit. If you got a breakfast concept on the going home side of the road, or
Yeah.
or if you wind up opening up instead of going into the Whole Foods anchored center, you wind up going in the one-off, random center, and then you've got, you're more likely to have like where Kmart went dark, and just the rest of the centers go with it. So that's where I was going with that.
You are the company you keep, right? And that's an important part of building your brand halo inside physical space. It's like where are you locating, because it speaks to who you are as a brand, what you stand for. So it's funny you said that about Joint. They're right next to one of the places I live is in Carmel, and they're right next to Whole Foods in Carmel.
Oh, neat.
So that's good. Yeah, good thought on that one.
Carmel's my favorite place. It's the home of Pebble.
I know.
I'll be
The
there
best
to
time
see
I've seen photography of you out here when I'm not here, and I'm frustrated that I'm not. It's great. You got a good life.
Hey, so what categories are you excited about nowadays? Where should people be thinking about investing their money?
Yeah. Um, when you say people, we're talking franchise. It's probably going to be the
Franchise.
same answer, but franchisees.
Yeah.
Uh, Wellness and beauty services is absolutely exploding. It's, people are just taking better care of themselves. Just about any trend that you look at inside this category, proactive health, precision medicine sounds a little healthcare, and I don't play there, but the whole category of things where people are doing better for themselves, so they live longer and extend their health span. And I kind of fold all this all together because you want to look good while you're doing that too. So I'd put, like, on a kind of a conjoined Venn diagram, I'd probably put fitness on one end of that and kind of aesthetics on the other end of it. It's just a fantastic place to come play. The margins are great. There's not really any cogs, so you don't have to worry as much about that. The flow through is fantastic. The consumers show up at your door. It's becoming crowded more quickly. The consumers show up at your door. Generally, this can cut both ways, but generally you're getting your labor is trained, so they're a little more sophisticated, and you're able to start them pretty quickly. You're not, although there might be some proprietary protocols, you're able to get them in and running pretty quickly versus other categories you and I know well, where you're training high school grads who haven't, it's their first job, and so it's a little bit of a different game. There are often membership models like we were talking about, which is a highly attractive and more valuable. The way I say it is, like, those dollars are more valuable. They're each individual dollar you sell is worth more because it's going to come back to you again. So from an earnings perspective, they're valuable businesses. And there's a lot of opportunities out there, back on the real estate point, to kind of arbitrage out this fact that you're usually connecting with those brands, often connecting with those brands digitally, and then going to something that might not be main on main. So you can get into real estate. You're not competing as much for main on main real estate, which makes growing a little easier.
Great. Okay. All right, Jay. Thanks so much.
Awesome.
See
Pleasure.
you soon. Hey, thanks for tuning in to Smart Franchising with Fransmart. I'm your host, Dan Rowe. If you enjoyed today's episode, this podcast is only going to get better. Please like, comment, and subscribe to hear more from the most successful franchisors and franchisees, and we'll see you next time.